right, so we got Detroit Pistons. It came out that they're gonna be picking number 21 in a draft with the swap with Minnesota. I think Minnesota got the 6th seed in the West. I don't know if that was Houston or somebody. I think it was Minnesota original pick. I don't know. It's a deep draft. The Pistons have, all their firepower of draft picks. They have young players. And you're going to see how the NBA playoffs go. I don't think the expectations is they'll make the finals or win the finals. But if they do, that's gravy. But they're in a position, if they want to move up the draft, they can. A lot of people like the kid Exo from Michigan State. From Michigan. You got the other kid from Michigan State, Cohen, who can jump out the gym. He been offered to play football, I think, by the Chicago Bears or something like that. He been offered a contract. So it's a very, very deep draft. You got, multiple guys, at guard. You got, DeBasta, A-Cup from Detroit, went to Arkansas. You just got a lot of guys. Darren Peterson. This is one of the deepest drafts and since the LeBron draft. Really the undoubted number one pick was going to be Darren Peterson, but then there's some questions about his character for taking the money and not wanting to play. So the low management being the big thing. You coming into the league and you don't want to play games. You get the money and then what that gonna do. But the Pistons can be in the position to really boost their farm system with the 21st pick. Whether it's to move up and get guys, or whether it's to get a solid guy that's ready to come in and contribute. At one point, I think a lot of people is trying to see if Chaz Lanier is going to grow into something, which they like him a lot. Bobby Killiman, he got cut for Tutul Smith, whatever his name is. So it was a guy, and Bobby Killiman, who never really developed for the Detroit Pistons. He never really developed for the Detroit Pistons. It's getting, in my opinion, it's getting spooky. Because the Pistons can kind of start, kind of doing what they didn't do, and that's why back in the day, and that's why the Spurs had longevity. They was developing Tony Parker and Ginobili from behind the scenes, and they drafted Kawhi Leonard, and the Pistons, it really took a turn when they got, they didn't get Bosh or Rasheed Wallace or, not Rasheed Bosh or Dwayne Wade or Carmelo Anthony. And then, some of those later draft picks where you'd be like, oh, they're not that significant. Where they took Ginobili and they took, Tony Parker, and they seen something and developed them into something. We had a bunch of players that, weren't worth shit. Chris Middleton developed somewhere else, you know what I'm saying? They took Singler, I think, over Devin Mitchell, and there was a lot of just missed opportunities amongst the way where they could have really justified coming back a lot sooner. They could have stretched out the longevity of that Piston team and kind of, instead of transferring power over to Ben Gordon and Charlie Villanueva, they could have transferred the power, over a Chris Bosh and over to a Dwayne Wade or over to a Carmelo Anthony. They could have transferred power over to them. And I just think that's something that, that's just not, that we all understand. We can't just really harp on it. But they chose to say, hey, I can recreate what I did with Ben Wallace, Rip Hamilton, Chauncey Billups, you know what I'm saying? And those guys, in free agency and via trade, and it didn't work. We knew you wasn't going to recreate Lightning in the Bottle twice. Everybody knew that. Everybody knew that. But they didn't. So, ultimately, but ultimately, they in a great position. They in a great position. Truth be told, the Pistons are in a fantastic position to develop Lanier. I mean, I think Giannis went later in drafts. I think Willis Reed and Jokic are the only NBA MVPs to be drafted into the second round. Um, uh, uh, yeah, then, I mean, you know, Gilbert Arenas was a second round pick. Obviously Ginobili was, I think, a late first, second. Tony was a late first. You know, there are some talent to be there are some talent to be had. There's some talent to be had later in those drafts. So, you know, it's just about developing them. And then the more you develop them, the more, you know, you lose people. You can lose or trade some of these people that you can't pay. You can just plug. That's what San Antonio just did. That's what all San Antonio did. As the Bowens went out, and, you know, as the Avery Johnsons went out, and the Sean Elliott's throughout the years, and David Robinson got up out of there. Robert Horry got up out of there. Out of all those guys out there, they said, okay, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Kawhi Leonard. They just had a farm system, and they really made the most of those picks. They really made them, and a lot of these times they don't give the kids like Kevin Porter a chance to redeem themselves. They don't give kids, they don't get at what's the kid that Milwaukee drafted? Forget the kid's name. Now he bouncing around the league. They don't really get them the development that they need. Forget the kid's name. He played in Milwaukee. I liked him a lot. You gotta let these kids play. And you just really never understand the terrible teams that ain't developing talent. But that's what it's about now for Terajan Langdon now. These guys that you drafting now, that now you're a playoff team at the pick 21st, 34th, 32nd, 54th, whatever it may be. How can you develop them? How can you develop them? That's the number one question. How can you develop them? That's the number one thing. How now can you develop these younger guys? How can you now develop them and keep this train moving? Because they're gonna be cheaper, and can you find them a role? So yeah, I look forward to it. So 21st pick. Now we're gonna see Terajan Langdon start building the next wave of guys that come in when they can't pay certain guys, and guys that can step in and be that guy for them. So that's how San Antonio sustained success throughout many years, and didn't really have many sustained drop-off years. And this is how they going to have to sustain. And the Boston would have sustained success had, Reggie Lewis, I think, not died, had Len Bias not passed away. They would have had sustained success from the Bird era to the 90s. But that's a different conversation for a different day. Check out Detroit Piston Talk playlist. Hit the link in the description. Find me everywhere. Peace.